kids who basically from a preschool age and early elementary age had poor sleep. We really think that there's greater connections than we probably realize. So it's often we think, let's say when kids come in and they have concerns of being overweight, what do we as professionals say? We want to get more activity, right? Eat better. We want to do things in regards to screen time. How often do we prescribe sleep as being part of that equation? But it turns out it probably is really important. The other thing is that sleep is connected to your appetite and your patterns of appetite. So biologically, when is our body supposed to be primed most to eat? Do you know?
When you wake up.
When you wake up, yep. And kind of from a practical reason, why would that be the case?
Because it went the longest without food.
You went the longest without food is one. The second thing is you provide calories so that the rest of your day, right, you're able to kind of be able to use calories in that particular way. But what happens when, right, we change our sleep patterns? Well, the hormone leptin is secreted during sleep, and leptin basically tells our body that, we're not hungry. What happens that we see is there's actually a shift in when we feel most hungry. So instead of feeling hungry in the morning, if we have trouble with sleep, just sleep patterns in general, we get hungrier later and later in the day. And the patterns of how we eat change. And this is a really complex area. They're still sorting out a lot of how this works, but it's very clear that the hormones connected with our appetite are regulated to some degree and affected to some degree by how we sleep. So that's a really kind of critical thing for all of us. The other thing is the hormone cortisol is regulated by sleep and secreted during times of stress, right? So we can see that when we're feeling stressed, what's the first thing that we do often? Eat more, right? things we feel like we have that need, right? But again, sleep and how we sleep is regulating that secretion of cortisol. And they're trying to sort out exactly what does that mean. But clearly, when we're sleeping less, there's some disruption in the typical patterns we see there. It's even related to looking at pre-diabetic levels and blood sugar level. I mean, it's a really complex area, but there's interesting how sleep just keeps finding its way back in there. And I think the bigger message is saying that we just know that sleep is related to everything we do, and that's why it's so important. We've all been here the night like, please don't make any noises, right? Please. And we get close. And I think, who has in the house right now newborns? What's the youngest? Does anybody have under 2? What's your biggest fear when you're trying to put your kid, how old's your child?
He'll be 2 in May.
Okay. So when it comes to putting him or her down for sleep, what's your biggest fear will happen there?
Well, really, he's a really good sleeper. So I'm really lucky with our first one. He's a good sleeper, but
good, yeah.
He will not go down without his passy though, so
okay.
We're still in like the comfort, very much a comfort thing.
We'll talk about sleep associations. Other challenges with the very young kids? What's some of the other? Raise your hand. Yes. Yeah.
I have 6-month-old twins, and I can't really touch them.
Yeah.
If I lay down, they pick each other up.
Right.
But they'll just cry.
Right. And we had twins to start off too, and something we'll talk more about some ideas. But it is. I mean, I think that it's a challenge of. Later on we'll talk about sleep association. So sleep association is basically when a child establishes a need for something to get them to sleep. It might be a pacifier, a rocking, it might be food or whatever. Now sleep associations aren't necessarily bad, but if we can't break our children from needing, let's say, to be fed through the night, and now they're 18 months and they still need to be fed to lay back down, that's when we get into trouble there. So we'll talk more about that. One of the things, concerns, just to kind of mention, I think for everybody to know, as we talk about things that come up, obstructive sleep apnea, right? And obstructive sleep apnea is basically when the adenoids or tonsils are enlarged enough to obstruct the airway either fully or partially. The thing with kids I want to say is that it's not as obvious as with adults. So adults often have a full apnea, meaning a full closure, right, of the airway. And that can be completely, you hear it in their snoring, you hear it in their breathing. Kids often have what's called hypopnea, which is a partial closure, and it's not as easy to detect there. But if you have kids who are chronically snoring, definitely we want those kids to be screened. We want to see the pediatrician, we want to consider, and sometimes the response immediately is, well, you know what, actually their adenoids and tonsils look pretty normal size. Here's the trick though. Large tonsils and adenoids don't necessarily mean obstructive sleep apnea. And small tonsils and adenoids don't mean that you're necessarily clear. I know that's not helpful. Oh, geez, it's a more complicating factor. But what it means is, if they're snoring, you really may have to have a sleep study to determine what's the degree of airway obstruction and how much is it influencing oxygen levels and carbon dioxide there. So the reason this is really important is it doesn't just relate to their physical growth, but it relates to things like attention and other psychological factors. So we talk about this, and just to say, if you have kids who are regularly snoring, especially if they're irregular by nature, we really want to make sure we screen appropriately. Because if it's addressed properly, it can make huge differences in just their well-being and functioning. SIDS fortunately has decreased with the back to sleep idea, with really kind of coaching parents do this, but it is another concern that happens, and we talk about the real importance of eliminating that loose fitting, that bedding that's not necessarily real tight, not situations making sure that they're not overheated in a really warm environment. Which, by the way, why does temperature matter for sleep? Does anybody know? Probably this is kind of an interesting factor. So when you go to bed at night, your body temperature starts to decrease ever so slightly through the night. At about 2 in the morning, let's say if you go to bed at 9 or 10 at night, about 2 in the morning, there's what is called a point of singularity, and it's the point at which your body temperature starts to rise in basically to your wake-up point. So let's say if you wake up at 5 or 6 or whatever. If the room is too warm, it simulates to the person sleeping that you're getting ready to get up. If you start feeling warm, it's saying basically, well, your body says it's time to get up. So one of the reasons it's important to have really cool rooms, add extra cover, but I'd much rather have kids in a cooler room than a warmer one, because they're going to sleep better in that way. So that's why it's really important. And we also deal with a lot of limit setting, bedtime issues and night awakenings, and we'll talk more about that. So, real quick, before we kind of talk about just guidelines as far as sleep, what time is it right now, Lori? 20 till 5. Okay. Any questions about just, I know it's just 45 minutes today, but any questions about just sleep in general, or concerns, or things I didn't address, or just would be helpful to talk more? Yep.
There was a question I was wanting to ask. My 15-year-old, she came home from school today, and she came running upstairs, and she said, I had a bad dream last night. And I said, what, did I kick the bucket? No.
That would not be a good dream.
And she said, well, not that way, but it was in a different way. She said, I thought there was a drive-by shooting and you got shot. And so she said, I've been so upset all day. Said I could not hardly concentrate or anything. And she was so upset. I didn't like it too much, but and it affected her all day.
Right.
Until she got home.
Yeah, and that's definitely something, if kids hold on, or adolescents hold on to things they've had dreams about, it's good if they can process that. It's something that, if they're working with someone already in therapy or with parents, you want to process that, because it's not uncommon for kids to have reoccurrent dreams. And they'll tell me, I have this dream every night, but I'm afraid to even tell people about that. So I appreciate you mentioning that. That's definitely something.
I have a comment. We adopted a little girl a year and a half ago. We've had her since she was a year old. She doesn't sleep.
She doesn't? Yep.
No.
Okay.
So, I don't know if it's something like we can pick your brain, or she could even get an appointment. We have 4 children, so it's not like we don't know how to get kids to
Right.
sleep. And she did have some trauma. We believe a lot of it was probably in the night.
Okay.
And she's had her adenoids and things taken out, tubes
So
in her
that's-
ears. So we have really went through and
A lot.
yeah, she sleeps with her older sister, not in the same bed, but in the same room. We've really tried to help her as much as
Right.
possible. And now that she's 4, we talk to her about it. But sometimes it's night terrors and sometimes it's not. But she's awake more nights than she's not.
Okay. Yeah, I do see families for specific sleep concerns. I will say that, in this situation and working, trying to figure out, brainstorming for any possible option there. But you're right. Early trauma, some early environmental issues can increase the likelihood of really poor sleep there. So.
Well, her brother also was adopted, and he gave us a lot of indicators right off the bat that
Okay.
some bad things happened at night, just
Okay.
from the way that he would behave and things that he did. But she was very young.
Right.
But we can't hardly think it's anything but trauma at this
Right.
point. I mean, she's been in our care for almost 3 years.
Well, and that's the challenge. She was so young. She might have an emotional memory from it, but obviously she can't
I think she
articulate.
does, and we're just kind of at a loss. We're both teachers of like young children, so we feel like we should know what we're doing.
Well, but again, you got into a situation there where, and I think it's a great point, is that when I mentioned about the connection between anxiety and sleep, a lot of times you might think, well, okay, what I need to really address here are the sleep problems, but the reality is maybe there's a lot of anxiety that's non-specific, right, but that she's really experiencing at night. That we have to better address in managing that. So, there's what's called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, and even with young kids and adolescents, we use that because it looks at just kind of how they experience that emotion and those thoughts during the evening hours, and without addressing that, you're probably not going to make gains in sleep. So, yeah, for families that are interested, we are expanding our department. I will say we have a pretty long wait list right now, but I certainly work with families on sleep issues, anxiety issues, therapeutically, so that's something that we can talk more about.
Well, her pediatrician said they even asked us about it.
I know, isn't that amazing?
But this would be the place to go. I mean, I don't even know what to do. But the older she gets, we're like, this is just not normal.
Right. I, as a psychologist, when I started, I was sleep is one of those areas that few people get training in. And when I was over in St. Louis, I was part of the Cardinal Glennon sleep team for the Children's Hospital, and so I definitely again work with some directly with families. But you're right; it's just not an area that is really addressed, and that's part of the reason that we're doing the series as it is. So I'm happy to talk afterwards too.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so let's use the last, 15 minutes or so, right? And let's talk about kind of some things that we really want to emphasize. By the way, I did mention this on here. I don't know if it was at the very beginning. If you go on, I have my website that has a couple hundred articles on a lot of different topics related to parenting and everything. It's my name, james-schroeder.com. If you just search under sleep, you'll pull up a number of articles related to sleep, one of which you'll pull up is a 3-part series about sleep. And so the first part just looks at all the reasons it's important. The second part is going to look at specific guidelines. I really encourage you to look at and ask yourself, are we doing these things? And if we're not, how can we adjust what we call sleep hygiene, sleep habits? The third part actually has linked handouts to very specific, like research-based techniques on, my kid won't go to bed, or my kid wakes up at night all the time, right? What do I do with this? So, we only have 45 minutes today, but I really mean that to be a resource for all parents. And if you have any trouble getting on my site, contact us, but just myname-schroeder.com, and you can search and use the tag terms below the articles there. So, first thing I want to say, this is going to be a theme through everything with our limit time, is I cannot tell you how important routine is for sleep, period, right? And you're going to see on every slide, routine, routine, routine. I understand, we've got, 7 kids, 1 on the way, we have sports, we have all sorts of things going on, but we really realized early, and I think it's because we had the twins, that if we didn't get on sleep as good as we could, this was going to be a long, long road, right? And with 6 kids in 7.5 years, it really remains so important. Now, we have 1 bedroom that has 5 boys, and I will tell you at night, it's a little crazy sometimes on what goes on there. And Will and Lewis will tell you they rotate times coming downstairs and having to sleep in a different place in the house because things are a little bit crazy up there, right? So I want to say to parents, it's not always that your kids are going to get that amount of sleep that we want. It's the question is, do you set up your day to allow them to have that amount of sleep, right? That's such a big thing to emphasize is they're not always going to get it, but is your day set up so that they can get the 10 hours of sleep or the 8.5 hours of sleep? And if it's not, we need to adjust those routines. So one of the things for infants I really encourage parents to do, and this has been done research-wise, it was really effective for us, is think about what we're trying to do with an infant, right? Let's take a 3-month-old, 2 or 3-month-old, where they're just starting into sleep. What we're trying to do is minimize parent awakening at night and maximize the blocks of time that an infant can get sleep, right? So what we did, and it's often recommended in the research, was keep your kid active until you go to bed. And maybe when these kids are younger, you're going to bed a little bit later. Maybe it's 11 o'clock. But if I put my kid down and I keep them active, lights on in the normal space, and I put them down at 11, if we can, I know it's an if, but if you can get 3 hours of sleep, right, which is great, before they wake up, and that means they wake up at roughly 2 o'clock, you feed the infant, you put them back down, and if you can get 3 more hours, you've basically made it to wake time 5 o'clock in the morning with only 1 night awakening. And again, the point of this is, as they get older, you see behind you at 4 months, you gradually might back them up to 9 p.m. And if you can get, let's say, 4 to 5 hours from 9 p.m. till 2 in the morning, right? 1 or 2 in the morning, and then you get 4 or 5 hours again, you've only had one nighttime awakening there. And really, with our kids, by 6 months, and we've been blessed with a lot of good sleepers, but we've seen some changes. By 6 months, our goal was we could lay our kids down at 7, and really many times they were well through the night for most of them. But you have to shape behavior. Sleep is just like another behavior. I think we often look at it as inactivity. It's not inactivity. It's shaping behavior by your routines. And so that's something I would really say is very, very important. Sometimes people ask, well, should I feed my kid before they go to down? You know what? When they're really young, I don't think I'm necessarily looking at all the research. It's a huge deal to feed before they go to make sure they're full. But when they wake up in the middle of the night, remember that when they wake there, let's say they feed at 2 in the morning, that should solely be feeding time, not playtime. If you start engaging with that young kid at 2 in the morning and it's playtime and you're doing a lot of interacting, unless you want to, you got to expect that they're going to be trained and shaped to believe that that's the time to be up, right? And I know there's a lot of different values around sleep, and I know there's a lot of different practices, and so some of you may have different values than I do, or that, we look at research-wise. All of that's great, but you have to ask yourself, what is our value of sleep, right? Many cultures co-sleep, and that's the value, and that may be helpful and appropriate in that situation. But I have many parents who come to me and don't want to co-sleep, but they are co-sleeping. And so if you are co-sleeping and you don't want to be, there are ways to kind of change the routines to improve that, right? The other thing is we do have to allow them to cry somewhat. And I'm going to talk about this condition of we call sleep association, because this is really hard. Let's say your child has been fed repeatedly through the night, right? And you're trying to break them. You feel like, okay, they're a year old, I'm still feeding them 3 times a night, they're 22 pounds, they're completely going to get through the night without it. What we need to do is, or rocking, in this situation, rocking has been the association. We have to get to the point where we're starting to lay our kids down without that association built in, right? And so you lay, let's say rocking is the association, you lay them down without rocking, and you can soothe the child while they're in bed. The key is that while they're in bed, because the moment you pick them up, you're rocking them, you're touching them again, right? You're sending that message that it's time to get up. What you do with this is that in the first cries they're going to have, instead of going right away and right away getting to their bedside, you wait a couple minutes. And in our world, maybe a couple minutes, although it might be excruciating for a mom, and my wife would tell you, physiologically, when you hear your kid crying, it might be excruciating. A couple minutes is critical, because if you do it immediately, then they're being conditioned to believe you're going to immediately respond to those needs. But if you wait just a couple minutes, right, come back, soothe them again, right, but don't remove them from the bed, try to soothe them until they go back down, and then repeat that on the first night. You're going to have a few nights that are just going to be rough in trying to break this, but you as parents of young kids can break it pretty quickly if you condition in the way that we talk about here. So let's say that second night, you lay them down the same way, but instead of, once they start crying, responding 1 to 2 minutes, you wait 2 to 3 minutes, or 3 to 4 minutes. And then you repeat that sequence on that second night. Having worked with parents on this, and having looked at the research, you know there's a few nights that are going to be rough, but I'm always amazed that if parents are able to kind of stick with this, that many times even difficult sleep problems that occur in the first couple of years can be changed in a matter of less than a week, and sometimes even a few nights. But again, we have to kind of consider what are our values according to sleep and how stringent are we about these routines. For toddlers, right, we're back to that routine. And the big thing I would say is that, and this is so hard because I know this is countercultural, and tonight, by the way, if you're interested at Crossroads Christian Church, we're doing a panel discussion at 6 o'clock on media technology and youth, which is wide open to the public, and myself and a couple of other people on this panel. The biggest one is, if you don't need to have media in the room, please don't have to have media in the room, TV, right? And I know that's so hard because I know that today, I think about 60% of kids who are under the age of 8 have a TV in the bedroom. And I understand it, and I know that when I've worked with so many parents who try to remove that TV, it doesn't happen very often. But if you have young kids especially, and you don't have TVs, or you can remove those, it is probably one of the biggest ways to decrease risk factors for those kids. And really that's part of kind of another presentation, but